Supposed to give Steve Hilton a big introduction because Steve told me I wasn't allowed to. So I have thrown my note card away from him, so I won't do it. But I have to say this. Any of you that know him know this guy is a supporter of the great causes of Arizona. And I don't mean a little bit. I mean he goes way out of his way to be supportive. Steve, I think I first met Steve when he and his partner were starting Meritage. I was running for city council at the time. In a number of campaigns, he was there for me, he helped me out, but he was always there in a much more important way. And that is on working on those projects that really make a difference, not only for our community, but for the world. I'm gonna let Steve take it from there because I could continue to go on, but Steve, thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for more importantly, for putting this together. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about a couple trips that we did to Israel. The second trip, which was the inspiration for this event that we're doing here today. And then I'm going to tell you about an exciting project that I'm working on here in Phoenix. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm so into this and why this is so important to me. So I'm a first-generation American. I'm going to stand up. I feel a little awkward sitting down. I'm a first-generation American. My father was born in Warsaw, Poland, and my mother was born in Germany. My mother fled when she was 10 months old at 1937. But my dad was a Holocaust survivor. He grew up in Warsaw in the decade before the Nazis invaded in 1939. There was massive anti-Semitism in Poland. My dad told me stories of how he couldn't go to public school because he'd get beat up every day, had to go to private schools. It was a terrible environment. Hitler did not do what he did without the backdrop, without the environment that was going on in Eastern Europe in those decades before. My dad lived in Warsaw. They consolidated all the Jews into a small section of the city, which was called the Warsaw Ghetto. In the spring of 1943, his mother and his sister were taken prisoner, never to be seen again, most likely gassed at Treblinka. My dad and his father started their journey through 5 concentration camps. My grandfather passed away in the second camp. The first camp was a 2-hour train ride from Warsaw called Majdanek. Then they went to a camp called Skarża Kamienia, which was a munitions factory. From there, they went on to Buchenwald, and then a sub-camp called Bergen. And then my dad was finally liberated in the spring of '45 in Theresienstadt, which is right outside of Prague. From there, he went on to an orphanage in Windermere, England, where they had about 800 teenage boys and girls. Spent a year and a half there, immigrated to the United States, spent about a year in Los Angeles. He was 17 years old and joined the military, spent 8 years in the Air Force, got his CPA education after that, became a CPA, got a master's degree at UCLA. So that's why I'm here. I got involved in Holocaust education and Jewish community activism in the early 1990s when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum was built in Washington, D.C. It's 32 years old now. If you've never been there, you absolutely need to go. And I've been much more involved in community here in the last many years as I've semi-retired from my position. One of the things I like to do every year is I like to take a group of young guys in their 30s to Israel to teach them about the country, but more importantly, to get them to learn leadership amongst themselves and from some of the older fellows like myself that go and bring them back to become stronger in the community. So our trip every year is scheduled for early October. So this year, we're all going to meet in Israel on October 9th. And a couple of the other leaders of the trip and I decided we're going to go a few days early and we're going to check out Dubai. So we landed in Dubai on Friday night, October 6th. And we had a beautiful dinner there. We stayed at the Burj Khalifa, the Armani Hotel, the tallest building in the world. You see a picture here. and we went to bed getting excited about the next day, how we were going to go to Abu Dhabi. We were going to see the presidential palace. We were going to see the largest mosque in the world. We were going to see a lot of cool stuff, the Abraham Accords family house that was built there at the cultural center, and we were going to have an exciting trip. And then Monday we're going to end up in Tel Aviv and do our trip. Well, as soon as we woke up in the morning, we saw the same news that you were going to see about the massacre, about the invasion in Israel. But at the time, we didn't really know how bad it was going to be because the news was slow coming out. So we went on our way that Saturday, went to the presidential palace in Abu Dhabi. From there, we went to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi, and we went on about our business. By that evening, we knew we weren't going to be able to do the annual trip that we did, and we needed to tell these young fellas that they should stay home. Many of them were already on their way to Israel because it takes about 24 hours to get there with the time change and everything. So some had to turn back, but we had to cancel our trip. Much to the anguish of our families, we decided we're going to go forward. The three of us, we're going to go forward. We were going to go to Israel. We were going to see if we could do something to help. We just felt like we were so close. We were a 3-hour plane ride away in Abu Dhabi that we couldn't just turn around and go home. So we went to Israel, and we landed there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, October 9th. We got off the plane. The airport was a very eerie sight. The only people that were coming in to Israel were Israelis that were coming back to serve. The IDF had called up 300,000 citizens and told them to report, to get their packs, get prepared. There's a war. They needed to report to their stations. On the other hand, people were leaving because Israel was in the midst of a war. Rockets were coming in, and people needed to get out of Israel if you were not an Israeli citizen. So we saw this chaos in the airport that was very unusual, like we hadn't seen before. When I really figured out something was different is when I went to the passport line. I went up to the foreign passport line, which was the line we had to go in because we're Americans. There was nobody. Everybody was going in the Israeli passport line because no one's going to Israel on a tourist trip on October 9th. So we got in the car. We got through there. We got our bags. We got in the car. We drove into downtown Tel Aviv, and what we saw was really eerie. There was nobody on the streets. The streets were rolled up, but we saw pictures like this of dramatic displays of patriotism that had just really unfurled in the last 24 hours all throughout Tel Aviv. The next morning we woke up. The first thing we were on our agenda to do was to go to Shamir Hospital, which was in a suburb of Tel Aviv, and visit some of the wounded. Before we did that, we needed to stop at a drugstore because we didn't want to come empty-handed. So we went in a drugstore and we bought shampoo, we bought toothbrushes, we bought toothpaste, we bought everything we could get our hands on the shelf, and filled up these big bags. And the lady that was running the cash register said, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Well, we're bringing things to the hospital." She started crying. I knew then we were in for a big day. Went in the hospital. The hospital was basically in the garage or the basement because they had evacuated all the upper floors in the building and moved everybody into the basement because they were prepared to get hit by incoming rockets that were being fired in from Gaza, which was 45 miles away. So it wasn't like a normal hospital setting where everybody had nice rooms. These were people that were crammed basically into a parking garage that was made into a hospital space, and it was very chaotic. The first person we met was this gentleman here, who's he was too stricken to talk. He was wounded. He was a security guard in a shopping center in Sderot, which is 2 or 3 kilometers from the Gaza fence. He had reported for duty on that Saturday morning, and there was a husband and wife and 2 kids in a car waiting for the stores to be open. The terrorists invaded. They shot and killed the husband and wife in the front seat with the kids in the back. He engaged with them, killed the terrorist, saved the 2 little kids. His mother had it all on videotape. They had a CCTV camera in that shopping center. She got the tape from the camera. She showed us the whole scene right there in the hospital. Oh. The next person we saw was this young lady here on the right. Her name is Bar. Bar worked in an observation post right on the Gaza fence. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but in Israel they have a tremendous amount of listening posts, surveillance posts. In the north on the Golan Heights, on the West Bank, and on Gaza, they have big rooms full of young girls 18 to 22 years old. Why is it all girls? Because girls have a better attention span than boys. And they're looking at the screen all day long, and they're listening, and they have all these devices. They're trying to see if there's any activity, if anybody's trying to evade. So they're all down there in this listening post. And this was probably one of the most heart-wrenching moments of the entire trip. They're there, and the terrorists invaded. There was 50 of them in a room, almost like a dormitory. The particular group that she was in was off duty. So think about like a sorority house, a slumber party. They're all in their pajamas. The terrorists invaded, murdered 20 of them, raped them, pillaged them, brutalized them. It was a story that was almost impossible to listen to. She wanted us to know because she wanted the entire world to know what had happened. 3 of the girls committed suicide because they didn't want to go through that experience. She survived. They didn't have any guns. They had a few small handguns. Most of their heavy weaponry was locked up in the armory. They couldn't defend themselves. Many of them escaped into another room where they were able to lock the door and keep the terrorists from getting in. But it was a terrible situation that I'll never forget hearing about it firsthand from her. Met 2 other guys that were heroes. They'd heard about the attack. They'd gotten in their car, and they had driven down to the concert site with only their M16 that they took home with them, and they engaged the terrorists, and they were wounded, and they were in this hospital. But incredible displays of valor and courage. So after we got done at the hospital, we drove to a local sporting goods store. Everybody was lining up to go to different places to buy supplies for the troops. Obviously, the military didn't have everything they needed because they didn't expect this kind of event. These guys needed socks. They needed long underwear. It was still a little bit cool at that time of the year. They needed batteries, flashlights, things like that. So we went to a sporting goods store, and we just bought boxes and boxes of stuff, enough to fill up a van. And then we sent these vans off to bases throughout Israel. After that, our plan was to go meet with a group of Ethiopian Jews who had resettled in Israel from Ethiopia many years before, who lived in a kibbutz right down on the border with Gaza. They had to vacate it was a kibbutz that was not attacked, but they had to leave their kibbutz because it was unsafe. And they came to Tel Aviv, and they refuged there. So we thought, we're going to buy a bunch of toys for the kids, because these kids have left their homes, and they didn't have their toys. So we went to Toys R Us, loaded up a couple shopping carts full of toys, and went on our way. Well, on our way to the hotel to see the Ethiopians, we encountered our first bomb coming into Tel Aviv. A Katyusha rocket was on its way. We're driving down the street. I wish I would have got more photos in this. Sirens went off. City buses stopped. Cars stopped. Everybody stopped, froze in place, jumped out of their car, and ran into the closest bomb shelter. I'm American, 62 years old. Never ran to a bomb shelter in my life. I didn't know what to do. I was in a panic. Got out of the car, followed our driver, ran to this bomb shelter, saw these people in there. They were calm. They do this every day. It happens several times a day. They were just waiting. We went in there, huddled up in there, waited about 60 seconds, heard the explosion when the Iron Dome system activated and the missile that was shot from the Iron Dome hit the Katyusha rocket, exploded. I don't know where it exploded. It might have been over the ocean. We were 2 blocks off the beach, or it might have been, 5 miles away. But you could clearly hear the contact, the impact, the explosion of the event. Waited 60 seconds, got out of the shelter, went back up, got in our car, went about our business. We ended up going to the hotel. We met the Ethiopians. We gave them the toys. They had a great time. It was a great experience for them. It was a great experience for us, and felt really good. So the next day was going to be our last day in Israel. We really only allowed to be there for a couple days because all the flights back to the United States were being canceled. Everybody was trying to get a seat on a plane. We thought if we'd stayed, we weren't going to be able to get out. So we kind of cut our trip short and went to this base. What do they want? What do soldiers want? They want cigarettes. So we stopped at 6 or 7 different Circle Ks, bought as many cigarettes as we could, and started going to the base. Okay, we're going to hand out cigarettes. We're driving to the base, and what do I notice? There's cars everywhere. Cars lined up on the side of the road for miles before you get to the base. I'm like, this is strange. It's just incredible. Thousands and thousands of people are reporting to these bases, and there's just cars everywhere. Got to the base, handed out the cigarettes. They were happy to see us. It's always great to see a pretty lady in a uniform with an M16. And there was just a lot of common, ordinary people that were there doing extraordinary things. This lady had made up a bunch of sandwiches, and she was just passing sandwiches out to people at the base. So now I want to tell you quickly about the second trip. The second trip was in January. This is the trip that Paul and I went on. A bunch of other people from Phoenix, business people, leaders in the community. We thought it would be a good time to go to Israel to really have some solidarity. No tourists are coming in, have solidarity with them, and to go down to the Gaza envelope and see what really happened. So that's a picture of myself, Peter Axe, and the rabbi's son. And the first place we went is Kibbutz Reem. This was a prelude. This was a warm-up to what we were about to see. Kibbutz Reem had 700 people in it. Only about 20 of them were killed, and about a dozen of them were taken hostage. But you could see the devastation that was happening there. These houses were bombed. They were burned out. They were bullet-ridden. That's my son. My son happened to come with us, a 19-year-old freshman at the U of A. 3 other young college-age boys came as well. They got the experience of a lifetime, I can assure you that. And we went to that first kibbutz. From there, we went to the Supernova Open Air Music Festival site. You've all heard about it. You've read about it. 364 young people were murdered there. At least 40 of them were taken hostage. It was a sight like I've never seen in my life. I'll never, ever see in my life again. Posts with pictures of the young people that were murdered there all throughout this area of land. This was kind of like farmland, just wild country, a mile and a half from the Gaza fence. Tributes to all that were murdered there. We had deep discussions trying to understand and process what happened, but it was a really impactful experience that we all had there. So from there, we went on to a place called Kibbutz Berry. Kibbutz Berry was one of the worst places of the attack. This was a kibbutz that was, I don't know if you know this, there's like 400 kibbutzes in Israel. These are generally very socialist kind of places where everybody works for the community. this particular community was in farming and printing. They had a huge printing factory there. Everybody lives in the same kind of house, and everybody works for the kibbutz. Everybody pitches in their money. Everybody lives the same. It's equality all throughout the kibbutz. Ironically, these are the most sympathetic people to the Palestinians. They send money from their paycheck every week to the Palestinians. They have pen pals on the other side of the fence. They communicate with people in Gaza, and they were the most friendly people at all, of all people in Israel that live right down there on the Gaza envelope. 1,200 residents, 130 of them were murdered, 7 of them were taken hostage. This was way more dramatic than the previous kibbutz we went to because it was much more devastated by the attacks. We had a young resident who was about 35 years old that was a former IDF member that took us through every house. He told us about every resident, who they were, what they did, how they were murdered, how they resisted, if they could. And we went in their rooms. Went in their shelters. We saw the bullet holes. I mean, this particular fella here, who's a hostage in Gaza, had his wife and 2 teenage girls. He watched them being raped. He watched them had their breasts cut off. They were murdered. And then the hostages ate the food in the refrigerator. It was the most barbaric things we could ever see. Have nightmares thinking about that trip. So from there, we visited another hospital that took in hundreds and hundreds of wounded. And that evening, to cap off the day, we had a barbecue with some IDF troops at a forward base called Camp Narim. Obviously, they couldn't drink because they were still on duty, but they could smoke cigarettes and cigars. So we did stop again at another Circle K and bought every cigarette and cigar they had on the shelf. Brought it in there. But we had a great time with them. You know, it was a super memorable experience for us to bond with them. There's Paul right there on the front of the tank, sitting there, bonding with these troops. From there, we went to Jerusalem. They had tremendous rallies like you see on TV for the hostages. This is at the Western Wall. Tens of thousands of people in there showing solidarity with the hostages, and it was quite an experience. We had a couple great meetings with Ron Dermer, who's the Minister of Strategic Affairs. He's really the Prime Minister's earpiece. He talks to the Prime Minister, helps him with strategy. He's on the War Cabinet. He's probably the second most powerful person in Israel. And then from there, we went on to have a great meeting with the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, at his home in his office. And it was a really incredible 3-day experience. So I want to quickly talk about a project here in Phoenix that's really important to me. And a study was done in 2020 in all 50 states in the country about Holocaust knowledge. And from that study, we learned that 63% of millennials and Gen Zs know very little about the Holocaust. They don't know that 11 million people were murdered. They don't know that 6 million of them were Jews. And they don't know the devastation and the magnitude of what the Holocaust was. 20% of those surveyed thought the Jews caused the Holocaust. That's how bad it was. So we went on to pass a law in Arizona in 2021. Arizona became the 14th state in the country to mandate Holocaust education. So now in middle school and in high school, you're required to take a unit on the Holocaust in each of the times in school. Unfortunately, our schools aren't doing a very good job teaching it. And some school districts are better than others, but there's not a lot of teeth in the law. And there's not a lot of repercussions if the schools don't teach it. So we're back at the legislature. We're trying to get the law expanded, but we need to find another way to teach these kids. So the Arizona Youth Historical Society has a site down on 2 blocks south of McDowell, off of Central, right behind the Burton Bar Phoenix Library, the biggest library in Arizona. And that's the site of the first synagogue that was built in Arizona, Congregation Beth Israel. It's the red tile roof building in the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a Holocaust education center. And the sole purpose of this facility is to educate Arizona's youth. We're building this facility to have the capacity to take 300 kids a day, 50,000 kids a year. We're going to bring them down there on yellow school buses. We're going to give them a 2-hour experience like they wouldn't get anywhere else. It's not going to be a traditional static museum where you can just go through on your own. We're going to take them on a journey, room by room, with high-tech animation, very immersive. It's going to be a very unique place. It's going to be like seeing a movie, or maybe like going to Disneyland, where you're going to be pulled through room by room by room. You're going to learn about the environment before the Holocaust that created the Holocaust. You're going to learn about lessons from the Holocaust. We're going to learn about how the Nazis were able to mechanize the whole systems, what they did to kill so many people. We're going to learn about the lessons after the Holocaust, what happened, and we're going to engage these kids on how they can think about from hate to hope. It's going to be a great facility. We're breaking ground on this next year. We've already raised almost $20 million. It's a $30 million project. My job every day is to raise the rest of the money, the $10 million that we still need. I feel very positive we're going to get it done. If any of you want to participate, connect with Paul or connect with Rabbi Alush. I'd love to have you involved in the project in any way possible, but it's going to be a really cool place. We've hired really one of the best museum curators in the world called Gallagher and Associates out of Washington, D.C. They recently built the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is the best new museum that's been built in the United States in the last decade. They did the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. They did the Anu Museum in Israel that just opened up this last year. It used to be called the Museum of the Diaspora. They've done phenomenal projects throughout the world, and they're putting together really a fabulous program here that's going to be inspiring, and I'm making a big investment in it. The way I'm going to measure my investment is about how many kids are going to get through there, and if I'm going to be able to stand outside and hand them each a Kleenex when they come through, because I want them to be really, captivated by what they saw. So with that, I know I'm over my time. Okay.
So when I asked Steve to do this, he said that he wasn't a good speaker. What do you think? Steve, thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks for the trip that you took me on. Thanks for the inspiration for this. And that's everything that we just got done talking about in the last panel with Henry and Bob, which is this concept of we have to change civics education in this country, and that's a great way to do it. Thanks.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.